What's up fellas, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ryan, or RJR Productions, and today we're going to be making not one, not two, not three, but 4 brand new helmets. Those being the main characters in the Bad Batch. We got Hunter, Wrecker, Tech, and Crosshair. Sorry guys, no Echo. Yet. But in all seriousness guys, this video took me almost 2 months to make, so I'd really appreciate it if you could consider subscribing. And while you're down there, click that like button too. It's right there. Just click it. Do it now. Alrighty, with all that said, let's get into the build. Let's start off with the main character of the Bad Batch, Hunter. Right now, I'm going to go glue this nose piece into this gap, and then I'm going to glue that main face piece onto that dome support. What this dome support does is it acts as a basis to build the whole helmet off of. It's not necessary, you can just do a front to back strip or a side to side strip or both, but I recommend doing this process because it makes it nice and strong. The next piece up is this mouthpiece. It's going to fit nicely behind this gap and add a nice second layer to that whole process. And then the next piece to come is the ear plate. This is separated into 2 pieces, and that bottom piece kind of angles off at a different direction to create a nice angular shape that has it on the sides. What I'm doing right now is reinforcing the end sides of the seams. This is very important so it'll stay strong. It's not as important for later in the process, which I'll get to. The next thing to start working on are those tubes that goes around from the very front all the way to the back. So these are what some of those parts look like. These pieces will be fitting right against that chin shape, and what they'll be doing is acting as that filler piece. Here you can see one of the sides completed, so now I'm going to build the other side. What I'm working on right now is that very top piece, because if you look at Hunter's helmet, there are some angles along the sides of those tubes. So that's why I separated that front nozzle into one part at the top and then one part on the bottom edge. That bottom piece is a bit more complicated because it has a lot more darts in it. If you're wondering, a dart is pretty much just a cut that you glue together. There are lots of those over this whole project. I add more darts as necessary to the template pieces I previously made myself. If it doesn't need any more, then I'll just leave it as it is and glue it together. The side pieces are also a little bit more complicated, but they're nothing too difficult. Now onto that back piece. The main back plate is just a big piece of cardboard that I glued on. There's not much need to show that. But this back lip is a bit more complicated because I need to add a beveled edge to a flat portion at the back. So I just tried my best to fill that out again with another big curved piece of cardboard. Another thing that I'm going to do is add some supports onto the inside edge because that is very important. It'll add some structural integrity while we're working on it before we resin the helmet. I'll get more on that later. This process, I'm pretty much just going along and adding those supports. I think there are around 8 on each side. You can go in and count that process right now. I'm not sure. And then once I had all those support pieces glued on, I needed to pretty much cover up the bottom with a piece of cardboard. You can see that bottom lip all attached. Here's what this one piece looks like flattened out. Pretty much all you need to do is make sure that you cut out the corrugation on the edge so it fits on. And now I'm going to add these internal supports to the other side. So these ones go in that front tube, and these ones attach at the side of the ear. Now I'm going to try to fill out this front plate. It's a bit of a complex shape, so I modeled that up with some paper and blue tape just to get the overall size of it. But I won't be needing this piece anymore. What I did was trace it out on some thin cardboard. This thin cardboard and the pieces that add on the inside will act as a strong base to build the rest of it off of, versus if you were just to use paper. These pieces plug in very nicely, and I'm very happy with how it's looking so far. The next thing to do is to add that segment that holds the front chin detail in place. I couldn't find very many reference images on this piece. I tried to make it as good as I could. Here's what I came up with. It's a bit of a bowl shape.
With the lower portion of Hunter's helmet completed, it's time to move on to Wrecker.
Here's the main front piece of Wrecker. Pretty much all it is just a bunch of darts that need to be glued together and folded along the darts as well. These pieces on the sides of this dome support are at 60-degree angles. Here I've gone ahead and attached those side pieces onto that main dome support. The dome support is very odd on this helmet because there are some flat parts onto the sides, whereas for example with Hunter, his is just a normal oval shape, but with Wrecker, he has some flattened off portions. But then when you add those side strips, it kind of forms an oval shape if you look at it from a top view. It's a bit odd, I kind of messed up on mine, so maybe just try to make sure that your back part is a little bit wider. Another thing I tried with this helmet was using ratios. In the description below, I'll have a link to this website that I used that has a bunch of really good Bad Batch reference images from the original 4 members of the Bad Batch. I used ratios by looking at that picture and examining the base size that I had of mine, and then I could measure that size and measure mine, and I'd be able to determine how big a new piece needed to be. That's pretty much how I ended up making all these pieces. I also previously made prototypes of all these helmets before I actually started making this video, so I knew exactly how big to make each one of the pieces. That's why you're just seeing me start with whole pieces right here.
Now with the basis of Wrecker done, it's time to move on to the sharpshooter, Crosshair.
These 4 main pieces make up the front shape of Crosshair's helmet. Note that that 4th piece I had to trim down a little bit more. The curving process of these pieces is also a bit odd, but once you get the hang of it, it just needs to curve inwards a bit. You kind of need to bend the cardboard and force it into the right spots, but then once you glue it together, you should get a nice smooth curve shape. This is what one of the ear pieces looks like. I'm going to glue that together just like this one on the left side. It fits onto the helmet pretty well, so I'm going to go ahead and glue them on. The next step is to work on the cheeks, so here's what one of them looks like taken apart. So let's glue it together. Now it's time to build the side tubes. These pieces just fit onto the sides and make up a nice curved shape. They curve inwards like this. Now it's time to add the supports on the inside. So I need to add number 1 at the very front. And I'm going to make it up again on the other side with all 5 support pieces on the inside. Just make sure to use score lines so the cardboard will be bending in the correct direction. These darts at the very front will be glued together with a lot of strong hot glue. And now these internal supports will just glue on just like this, as I have shown here. And then make sure to glue it on while pulling the cardboard edges together to make sure that it fits. This piece at the very top has that little semicircle cutout, so it'll fit that kind of scope shape. And now I'm going to go ahead and glue on this main back plate. These pieces act as supports that go around and hold up that whole back lip that continues around. Here's what that piece looks like all flattened out. I have it in two pieces just to make it a little bit easier to work with. This is what one of them looks like glued up, and it fits on very nicely.
And with Crosshair's lower helmet completed, Tech is up next.
Here's the basis of Tech's helmet with that front piece. I'm just going to go ahead and glue all of these darts together and curve it up in a nice way. I'm making sure to score the cardboard in the direction that I want to curve it. Here's what one of the sides looks like completed. I'm going to go ahead and work on the other side. These are all the components that make up the side, with the cheek pieces at the top and the chin pieces at the bottom. This lip will just fit around, and then this lower channel will fit across that main support base around that front nozzle. Here's what one of those pieces looks like all finished up. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that on and then line up the sides as well. This piece fits on the top, this piece fits on the side, and then this piece fits on the front side with that main big plate fitting along the back. These make up those cheek compartments. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some triangular supports along the sides and also covering up the back to make it ready for this piece. What this piece is doing is it's just filling out that main T shape from the back, connecting both the sides and gluing onto that dome. Now I'm going to start working on those complicated geometrical shapes that go on the sides of Tech's helmet. I just finished my geometry class, so hopefully that will come in handy. I'm starting off with the base hexagon and then another smaller hexagon that fits on top of it. Then I have this little 3/8 inch wall that I'm going to wrap around it. I already went ahead and made up one of them so I can show you how I make the other one on camera. This piece just fits inside. Again, it's 3/8 of an inch tall. Here's what that shape looks like. Now I'm going to fill in these 5 sides right here. Now I'm going to be building the main base plate that holds on the whole top. So here's what that looks like with a circle cut out in the middle. Again, that's to hold the PVC pipe to allow it to pivot. Now I'm going to be adding these 6 details across the very top and then that one top plate. So here's what that top looks like and then all 3 sides. I'm going to be mirroring this on the other side. I'm not going to go into the logistics of all the angles here, but just make sure that you're using the right angles to make up hexagon shapes. Now here's what the pivot looks like for that main visor piece. This is what one of the sides looks like all taken apart. So I'm going to add that second layer on top. That pivot is again at the back with some 1-inch PVC pipe. Here are 2 of the sides completed, and here's what that main frame looks like that holds the lens. This piece fits together, and then it has angled cuts so that main side piece can fit on here. Again, with the resining process later on, it'll make this super strong, so don't worry about supports anytime soon. This piece fits on the top of the back of the helmet. It pretty much just fills out that shape and preps it for these pieces right here. These pieces will plug in and fit right inside this gap.
So at this point I have all of the bottoms of the helmets completed. So what I'm going to do now is fill out those domes with my normal dome technique.
My dome technique is pretty much just a piece of cardboard that is 2.5 inches wide. And then every 0.75 inches, I'm going to put a marker and then that's going to cut inwards. You can see it cuts inwards and it folds all together and fits along the sides. Then the pieces that fill out the very sides are just 2 inches wide. This is pretty much just a normal piece of cardboard that's 2 inches wide, fits in the side, and goes up to the top. Now I'm going to fill in this corner shape. So what I have is that same exact piece that was the front piece, and this piece will just get glued together the exact same way but this time it'll fill in that corner shape, and then we'll just be left with 8 smaller triangles to fill in. Alrighty, now we have the whole Hunter Dome finished. I'm pretty much going to use this exact process for all 4 of the helmets in this video. Alrighty, and that's it, one of my dome techniques. I went ahead and glued in this nice detail piece on the front of Crosshair's helmet. It pretty much just acts as a base to mount all those little greeble details on later. Again, using that exact same dome technique for Crosshair. Wrecker's dome is a bit different because it has a groove cut in it. So what I did is I made the dome normally, and then I cut it in half and added a little trench to fill in that gap, and then I just went ahead and glued on that piece again, and it left it with a very nice visible gap that I was really happy with. Now I cut out these 6 holes at the very front. I pretty much just used a pen for sizing. These are some of the details that fit along the sides. They're pretty much just boxes with some details on the tops. Dome technique, again, the same thing. It takes a little while, but it's worth it, and it looks amazing once it's finished. Now I'm adding a little groove in the back, so I cut out the parts and added some corrugation, and then I covered up the corrugation along the top. In case you're wondering, covering up the corrugation pretty much just means you peel off the top layer of a new piece of cardboard, and then you glue that over the gaps in the cardboard. Alrighty, here we have a couple of the details on tech completed, like that front little mouth thing. I have no idea what this is, but it's there on the helmet. And then this back piece is also nice and finished up. Here are what the goggles are looking like right now. I just quickly modeled these up with a couple cylindrical pieces. As you can see here, it's pretty much just a piece that kind of has a curve in it, and I think it's around 6 inches long. So once it curves up, it makes a nice circular shape. And now the backs of the glasses just fit over my head normally. Here's what all of the tech components look like.
Now with all those domes completed, it's time to try something a little bit different. We're going to be using some
resin.
Now, what I'm going to be doing with this resin is applying it over the whole helmet so it'll become nice and hard. And then I can sand that down, and it'll pretty much turn the helmet into a hard plastic, which will make it very, very, very durable.
This is the type of resin I bought. It comes in 2 parts, the epoxy and the hardener. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mix these together, and then I'll be able to apply it over it with a sponge brush. So I'm going to be mixing it in a cup with a popsicle stick. What I do is I mix out equal 1:1 ratio parts, and then mix it together for 3 to 5 minutes. I just did 3, and then I applied it with that sponge brush over the whole thing. I'm just going to tell you guys that I bought 25 sponge brushes because each one only has a single use, so just make sure that if you're doing this, you're going to need to apply multiple. As I said earlier, 2 coats on the outside, 1 on the inside. If you want to, you could do more on the inside, but I just chose to do 1. You want to keep going until the outside is shiny, so I did that with all of the helmets. 1 coat made it kind of dull and it wasn't very sturdy, but then adding the second coat of resin on top of it eventually made it very, very hard. So you could tap on it and it would sound like hard plastic. Make sure to do even brush strokes and don't try to put a big glob on there all at once, because that will leave big lumps and drips that you'll have to sand down later on, and it's just a big hassle. Tech's helmet was exactly the same, 2 coats on the outside, 1 on the inside. All those detail pieces that I couldn't get the inside, I just did 2 on the outside. Now I decided to sand down the resin to prep it for some filling. I just went over it with my mouse sander on some 80 or 60 grit. I just chose whichever one I had on hand. What I'm doing is just roughing up the surface so the spackling will stick to it. The spackling is a filler I'm about to use in the next step. Just make sure to go over the whole helmet and spend your time making sure that you get as much of the high spots off as possible to open up as much surface area that will prep it for the filler. Tech's helmet was a bit more tedious with all those extra details, but I eventually got there. Now comes spackling. Now this is a cult classic of my channel. I do this in every single one of my videos, but this time it's a bit different. The spackling process is exactly the same. Just go over the helmet with your finger, again smoothing it out, and I did use water on this first helmet, but I quickly realized that that's not necessary. You do not need to use water, but you can if you want to. Make sure to try to fill in those main gaps. That's the main process you're going for. And here with Wrecker's helmet, some of the detail gaps I actually did not fill in, like right below the eyes. I chose not to fill those because I'd rather have the smoother looking resin than fill it with spackle and possibly not be able to sand it down because it's such a tight gap. Same thing goes for Crosshair right around that brim of the front where he kind of has that eyebrow piece. I didn't want to get too much spackle in that gap because I physically would not be able to sand it down. It's just too tight of a corner. Same thing with Tech's helmet as well, around those gaps on the side hexagons. I did not want to fill those in all the way. I wait around 6 hours for the spackle to dry, and then I go into sanding. Again, the same thing with that palm sander, and then I go in with some finer grit later on. I do around 120 on the palm sander, and then I go 400 by hand, and then finally 2000 by hand. This creates a nice smooth surface that'll prep it nicely for priming. Also note that on these helmets, I did around 3 coats of spackle on each one. Again, after the first coat, you want to lay down some primer, and you don't have to cover the whole helmet again. Just with the primer, it shows you where all those problem spots are, and then you can go back and cover those again with a second round of spackle. You want to save yourself some time and just don't fill in the whole thing again, it's not worth it. I filled in all those details on Tech's helmet as well, with all the extra pieces, including that goggle piece. Now it came to filling with our trusty filler primer. Filler primer is great, I love this stuff. It's pretty much a very thick primer. What it does is it goes on the helmet in a very thick coat, and then it fills in all the small tiny imperfections. And then you can go back and smooth this out with some 400, and then I did 2000 grit after that. Just sand it down to make the filler primer even smoother and find out where all the problem spots are. Here's what Hunter's helmet looks like in the middle right after a spackling step. You can see it's a very thick layer, but what I'm going to do is go sand it down and make it very smooth. Filler primer again, this should be the last layer covering it up. Just make sure not to put it on too thick to where you could have runs on this last coat. For the rest of them though, go as heavy as you want, it really doesn't matter because you're going to be sanding it down anyways. I did the same process for all the rest of the helmets, and I think I went through around 3 or 4 cans of filler primer over this whole project. So just make sure you have enough. Now it's time for the final colors. So with Wrecker, the lower dome and back of the helmet is painted gray. Now with Hunter's helmet, I just covered the whole thing in flat black. Now there are 2 ways you could do this. You could go the black route or you could go the gray route. I decided to go the black route because I'd rather build up some lighter colors on top of it than build up some darker colors on top of the gray. I went ahead and masked off where all those gray details would remain on Wrecker's helmet, which is just the back of the dome and then the back of the lower helmet. The rest of it will be painted black, then we'll be hand painting the white details later on. Now with Tech's helmet, the 2 sides have some gray bits on the tops, and then the rest of them are white. Note that in this video, I did not paint those lightning details on the sides because you'll be seeing that in a future video coming very, very soon. I painted these with some white primer. That's the white color on Tech's helmet. Now it came to the tedious step of painting on the detail accurate parts. So what I did is I mixed up a light coat of gray and I dry brushed it over the whole helmet, and then I went to a reference image and tried to copy all those scuff marks and loose chip paint details that are on Hunter's helmet. Then I went ahead and painted the white details with a little bit of off-white paint. It was kind of a gray white that I mixed up, and then I went up with a dark red color and painted on all those red details, and I just made sure to layer it just like in the images to make sure it was nice and accurate. I also went ahead and purchased some Tamiya masking tape, which is some pretty thin masking tape, and it works really well getting all those detail pieces all marked out, and then you can go and bulk it over with all the thicker masking tape. It's very handy. I recommend just going and buying some thin masking tape online. I painted the rest of Crosshair's helmet some primer gray color. The bottom half was black, and then the top half was just the primer gray. I went ahead with the same steps of looking at the reference images that you can find in the description, and I added those details all over the helmet, trying to make it as accurate as possible. Now here I'm trying to paint those details on Wrecker's helmet. Now Wrecker's helmet has some interesting details with those kind of mandible tusk things at the very front, so just try to make it your best work. Just look at the reference image and copy it all down. And then I also painted the two Arabesh 99 decals on the top of the helmet. You want to make sure to get the drips on those accurate looking as well. Here's Tech's helmet. What I'm going to do right now is paint the rest of it that is not masked the flat primer white color. And now it's time to peel that all off. This is a very rewarding stage where you get to see all of your hard work unfold. I painted the front details black, and then those two side compartments, I painted those gray. The back flap, I painted that gray, and then there's the two gray strips on the top. And then the goggle frame was black, and the goggles were black as well. I went ahead and did the same exact weathering method on this, where it's pretty much you're just dry brushing some colors. So with Tech, I mixed up a very, very light gray color, dry brushed that over the whole helmet, and then I mixed up an even darker color and dry brushed that over select parts, again looking at the images. Then I took some white paint and I added all the chipped details on top of that. Now I'm going to show you how to build that nice side tube on the helmet. So what I'm taking is this marker and some pliers, and I'm basically peeling off this back compartment right here. Just pull it off with some force and you should be all nice. You need to empty this part out right here, make sure to put it in the trash right away. And then I hacked off that top piece. I actually didn't have time to put this on my helmet, but in a future video that will be coming very soon, you'll be seeing that part. These pieces make up the front chin details on Hunter's helmet. It's just these three little wedges that stick together with a gap in between. Let's take a look at all of the helmet details. These pieces will get the same weathering treatment as the rest of the helmet, and then I can go ahead and glue them on. Hunter's helmet has those two greebles in the front tubes, and then one in the very middle of the helmet. And then I also went ahead and filled in those dome gaps that you can see in the top corners with some thin cardboard. Now Tech's helmet has those four little antennae at the back. I just used some wooden dowels for those. Same dry brushing technique as well. I glued on all the details for Wrecker's helmet, and pretty much the only thing left to do is to add the lenses. Now I started working on the red for Tech's helmet. This red is a little bit lighter than the rest of the guys because his helmet is also lighter as well. Just mix up the multiple layers with your thin masking tape outlining the track. Now it's time to work on the lens. I did this for all the different helmets, but pretty much what I did is I took some window tint and I applied it over the whole piece of plastic. This plastic comes from a cheap salad lid. What I'm doing is taking my tint, a squeegee, and some soapy water. And then I'm applying that soapy water over the whole piece of plastic, and then I peel off the protective label on the tint, and then I get the squeegee, line it up at the corner, and spread it across the whole piece. You want to make sure to get as many air bubbles out as possible.
Now that everything is completed, let's get some B-roll going. And well, here we are. After 2 months of work and a pretty long video, that's it. It's done. Here are all the helmets. This project was very, very fun to work on, but at times it was a little bit frustrating. One of my favorite aspects I was able to get with these helmets too is the goggles moving up and down on Tech's helmet. If you have any suggestions for what you want me to make next, please leave them in the comments down below and consider subscribing. I'll be seeing you all very, very soon. So, thanks for watching.